Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our regular quarterly Q&A session with the CEO and Chairman of the Board of Nominet with members. It's an open call. Any member who is interested is very welcome to attend. So it's great to see so many people who have registered and so much interest in today's session. My name is Nick Wenman-Smith, and I'm here sort of in the capacity of Head of Stakeholder Engagement. On the call, we also have Rob Binns, who is the Acting Chairman of the Board of Nominet. We've also got Ellie Bradley, who's the Acting CEO, and I'm also joined by my colleagues, Elaine Quinn and Ruth Henderson, who will be helping us with the Q&A and the slides. So just a small number of housekeeping points, and we'll get on as soon as possible. Firstly, the session is being recorded, and as you know, all these sessions are recorded and put up on our Vimeo channel for members who want to see what is discussed, but are not able to make the session in person, so it will be recorded. So just take that in mind when you're speaking and putting your questions forward. We have a couple of observers on the call. So we do have a journalist, and we also do have some people who are going to be helping us with our listening exercise over the next few weeks, who are also going to be listening in but not speaking. In terms of the format, I'm going to hand over to Rob just in one moment, just to give a little bit of a brief update. We've had quite a few questions in advance. We will go through some of those, trying to give everybody who's put a question in a chance to have at least one question responded to, and then we'll have open Q&A. So just put your hand up in the Zoom functionality, and we will go through and unmute you, and you can ask your question, and we'll try and use the time as effectively as possible, making sure that everybody has a chance and it's not sort of just one or two people who dominate everything. So welcome, and over to you, Rob.
Super, thanks Nick, and good morning to everybody. Really appreciate people taking the time out this morning. What I wanted to do is not take too long, but just share a few slides that we have pulled together just to talk a little bit about some of the elements of the reform plan that we are embarking on as a company. Share with you some information, talk a little bit about Nominet and the shape of the business today, and in some cases share some information that will be sort of net new disclosure to members in terms of the business. Don't intend to take too long on that, and then as Nick says, we'll divide up the remaining time between questions that have been pre-submitted and then allowing for an open discussion. Ellie is going to sort of chip in and help address some of the points in the slides as we go through, and we do have one or two other directors who are potentially on the call and may be available to answer some of the questions later. We will get through as many of the questions as we can, but I'm also sensitive to the fact that members and everybody has other time commitments, and so we'll wrap this up on time at the bottom of the hour at 10:30. So with that, if you could flip the slide for me, please. By way of introduction, for those of you I've not spoken to, my name is Rob Binns. I am the acting chair here at Nominet. I've probably covered most of the other points of the introduction, but the three elements that I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today is the reform that's already underway, a little bit about the structure of Nominet, the business today, and also how we expect to see the business shape up in the future, and then talk a little bit about governance. Next slide, please. So, look, it's clear that the vote from the EGM was a clear signal from members that people are expecting change, people are seeking change. And the most important part of what we are embarking on here is the active listening process. We want to hear views from all members, all stakeholders on a full range of topics. I think the idea that, any one collection of members or stakeholders have, a singular and common point of view is a bit of a misnomer. There's a wide range of views, there's a wide range of members, but we want to hear from everybody. And so it's really important for us that we embark on that listening process. We've talked about it before. It was in my previous note to members. And I'm delighted that Ellie and the team have been making progress on that. And we expect that something will come out to you very shortly. As part of that process, not only is it to seek your views, but it's also really to help understand priorities. Okay, it's really to help us think about at what rate and pace and in what order we should start to tackle things. There are a lot of things to be done. As a company, we're very clear about that. We know that there is a large body of work that needs to be done. There are a large number of areas where we're looking for changes to be made. But in what order should we tackle them? What priority? How quickly? Those sorts of questions will all form part of the listening process. Okay. Now, that is absolutely critical. It's really important that we take the time to listen and take the time to hear what people have got to say. You know, one of the things that's been said to me in my short time here doing the acting chair role is we need to listen to what members want. So I think it's really important that everybody understands that we are going to listen. We are going to embark on that process. And we'll talk about it a bit more in a second. And that is going to be key, and that will help us inform what we need to do. We will also publish the results of that. Below this are some of the building blocks of the elements of change and reform that we've heard as we've gone through the process. So there are clearly concerns about determining the future structure of the company. There are clearly concerns about executive compensation. Member engagement is a big one, obviously. Public benefit, governance. These are all areas where we've heard the need for change. We've heard that members are looking for change and represent the core building blocks of the reform plan that we have underway. And the last level, represents some of the more detail that sits behind it. So in member engagement, for example, what does membership mean? The Registry Advisory Council, the forum, under public benefit, we're committed to maximizing public benefit. We want to get members' input and feedback on how to do that. What's the best way to do that? How should we think about using the reserves? The two boxes on the bottom left, I do want to draw people's attention to. I've color-coded them slightly differently. We will be as transparent as we can be across all of these boxes. However, there are going to be times where the timing of what we share with members is going to be a little bit different. So for example, if we're looking at a review of diversified businesses and we're taking a decision about that as a board, we're not going to communicate certain things at certain times. If, for example, it means customers may not be placing contracts with us, or if it risks the employees in that particular business, or if, for example, it puts at risk commercial contracts or security contracts. So we're going to be very thoughtful about the way that we communicate, but we will absolutely communicate and be as transparent as we can be across all of these things. We know that there's a need for change. The board and the company are committed to change. We know that there are things that we need to do differently. We think these are the building blocks under which that we're driving those. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of these as we move forward. Next slide. As I said, the listening process is key, and we have launched that process. Ellie is going to be announcing the details of that very shortly. It will be an independently led process. It will focus on establishing member views across a whole range of topics, and as I said, importantly, priorities, right? It's very important that we seek to understand the priorities. It's a multi-channel approach. So what do I mean by that? The idea is that we will reach out to a lot of different stakeholders in a number of different ways. It could be surveys, it could be interviews, it could be calls, it could be all of those things in a bid to find a way to understand what members are clearly looking for. And we will make those findings public. Okay, so as we go through the process, there'll be touch points where we will make those findings public. We won't hide. We will be transparent about what that feedback is, and we will share that with members as we go through it. And while it's absolutely critical that we listen and absorb that feedback, because it's going to be a key input into the direction that we take, there are certain things that we can take and decisions that we can take and actions that we can make now that are consistent with that future direction, right? So even though we value and want and are relying on that listening process to inform those key decisions, doesn't mean there aren't some things that we can start moving on and get cracking on. So you've heard us talk about the Registry Advisory Council. A lot of work is going on into the design around that, and getting that up and running and making that a thriving success will be important. We're going to continue to pursue the public benefit work that has already been underway. So you would have seen recent activity around the Prince's Trust and other projects. And in FY21, the company spent £3.7 million in public benefit payments, supporting a number of those activities, right? So we will continue to do the good work that the team has already been doing. On governance, we're appointing a search firm, as most members are aware, to lead the search for a CEO and for new board positions. We are initiating the salary benchmarking review around executive compensation. And we are also initiating internally the review work that we need to look at the strategic options and choices that we have for the different diversified businesses. And again, I'll talk about that a bit more in a second. So the key point here is we want to listen. We really want member feedback. We're not going to commit to a series of things until we clearly understand that member feedback. But notwithstanding that, there are some things that we can do which are clearly going to be consistent with what members are seeking, and we're doing that, and we're putting those steps in place. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of a diagram that's designed to show what Nominet is today. And I'm just going to spend a minute just talking through the structure here. And just sort of try and explain to people some of the things that are going on. If you look at the big boxes at the top of the slide, you can see in the bottom left, we have the core registry business. And as you move out from that, you see sort of different boxes that represent the different activities that we do as a business. So as you go outwards from the core, you have activities like meeting the C&I expectations, so how to think about security, how to think about resilience, etc., etc. As you continue to move out, you have all the issues around keeping .uk safe, criminal domain detection, for example, how to think about suspensions and resolution, and all that good stuff that goes with keeping the .uk space safe. And then the last box is the PD&S work that we do for the government. Specifically, some of the aspects of the security that we provide and the shared technology that really comes from running the .uk business, and how we can leverage that in working with the government. That whole piece there, that represents, as you'll see on subsequent slides, the vast majority of the revenue that we have as a business. If you go to the right-hand side, there's the work that we do to support the domain industry and the wider society, the public benefit program. I think there's an acknowledgement from the company that there's more that we can do here to support the domain industry, and that there's an acknowledgement that we can step up our participation and activity in this in a number of different ways, and we'll be looking at how we can do that. And then obviously on the far right-hand side, there's the public benefit approach and how we support wider society. In the bottom box, you see this idea of creating the independent revenue. So the company a number of years ago, as many members are aware, was looking at how to create other revenue sources in the expectation that .uk revenues would decline over the mid to long term. So in order to preserve the level of investment that was necessary to maintain the registry business and to support the public benefit program, how could the company look at independent revenue streams that would create some diversification and provide some protection against that potential decline in revenue? And so, as members are aware, there are other aspects to the business. So not only do we have the PDNS contract with the UK government, but potential international business along the same lines. There's Siglass, there's the other TLDs that we run. So there are other areas where we have independent revenues to potentially defray what was expected to be a sort of a decline in .uk revenues over the mid to long term. That's Nominet today. And what I thought it might be helpful for members to just see is, if you can flip to the next slide, the numbers in the circles that you see there represent the revenues that are associated with each of these elements. So if you look at the core registry business, it's £39 million, or about 79% of the total revenue of the company. If you look at the PDNS piece, and the bits that sort of fit in that enhanced larger box that you see there, that's another 7.5 million, or 14%. So you put those two together, you've got 46.5 million. 93% of the revenues for the company are essentially associated with that bigger box. The bottom piece, the independent revenues that we're talking about there, represent about £3.5 million worth of revenue, or about 7% of the revenue for the company. Now, we have committed to be more disclosive, if that's such a word, around kind of the financial elements of the individual parts of the business. This is a first step in that direction. Okay, we're sharing the revenues associated with each of the individual parts of this. There is work to do to get to a good allocation of costs and how we think about costs. And we will be moving forward. We will be looking at publishing and reporting sort of the underlying profitability and sort of P&Ls, if you will, for some subsegments of this. So we're committed to that, and we will continue to do that. There is work underway to make sure that we get the costs allocated correctly and do that. But in the spirit of being a little bit more transparent and sharing with members the size and scope of the business that is Nominet today, we thought this might be a helpful view to understand, where the buckets of revenue are in the company. Next slide, please. So just a couple more slides from me before we move on to the Q&A. So as we think about the core principles of the future structure, there's sort of three buckets that we've looked at. On the core registry, the aim is to run it at the lowest reasonable cost while supporting public benefit activities and whilst also delivering sustainable, high quality performance, right? That's the objective. Our goal is to keep prices low. We know that they're not the lowest, but we know that they are competitive relative to others. If you look at it, the 1 year price, for example, in real terms is actually down 40% when you adjust it for inflation over the last 20 or so years. So our goal is to keep prices low. And that will be part of what we continue to look at its heart as the core registry business. I would just point out, because I know it's a question that came up in the submitted Q&A, are we looking at pricing promotions? Yes, there's a 25th anniversary pricing promotion under consideration. Obviously, as many members are aware, it's the 25th anniversary this year. We're looking at whether or not there's some special pricing promotion that we can put in place to support that. So I can deal with one of the questions that's already teed up later there. In the middle box, if you look at what we're talking about, the work that we do around PDNS and supporting the government, I mean, this is critical for national security, as most members are aware. It's clearly good for society and in the public benefit. The government has made it very, very clear that this is critical to our national security and our national infrastructure, and we will continue to run these services alongside DNS and be an important part of the Nominet business moving forward. The technology and the IP that it's relied on is closely aligned to the core, and therefore it's not really a material diversification from the core. It's really building on that, and given the important role that Nominet plays in keeping .uk safe and the wider security support that we provide the government, it's clear that this is important for us and will continue to be important for us in the future. If I look at the far right-hand side, there are some other elements of the business. We've just talked about that, and you know, we acknowledge that there's been a mixed track record of some of the other diversification activities that the company has embarked upon in the past. Not all of those investments over the last 5 or 10 years have worked out or been successful, right? So I want to make sure that everybody understands we acknowledge that, and that has not been a 100% batting average on delivering against those new projects. We are going to look at the core aspects of all areas of the business that Nominet has. Work is underway at the moment, looking at strategically what are the right things to do with some of those businesses. How can we best get the most value out of them and be the most sort of aligned to the future direction. That will be partly informed by the listening process, as I said, but notwithstanding that, there's work underway so that we have all the facts at our fingertips in order to make the right decisions and the right trade-offs when we clearly understand a lot of the feedback and the input from members, okay? One of the things that's going to be really important is to understand what aspects of technology and IP or information or intellectual property rather, that the different parts of the business rely on, so that we can provide the right level of support, right? So we're looking at making sure that we clearly understand what IP is critical to delivering the core registry business. Next slide, please. Okay, so a couple of points on structure and governance. I think most members would acknowledge that we need to have a clear look at the right corporate structure that works for all stakeholders, and that I've included a few things here, included but not limited to links between discounts and membership, the voting rights caps issue, the whole not-for-profit, profit for a purpose kind of structure, the governance structure that the company requires in order to meet its critical national infrastructure obligations. So how does the company protect itself from things like board capture risk, which is a really important point that the government is keen to make sure that we understand. So I think it's, this is not intended to be an exhaustive list. This is where the listening process again comes in. What are the things that members are keen for us to work on? What are the things that are important? How do we think of the sequence and order of priorities, right? All of those sorts of things. They're the things that are important to us, and we will look at as we think about the long-term structure. On the right-hand side, as everybody is aware, we are working through an independent search process to appoint a new chair and to appoint new members of the board. That will also include appointment of a new CEO. We did, as many members are aware, consider a number of different ways to engage Sir Michael Lyons and Axel Porlick. As was made in, we discussed advisory roles for Axel to help us through the listening process, for example. We discussed possibilities of Sir Michael taking other roles. In the end, the board felt that we need a long-term appointment that will help navigate the company through the significant change agenda that we're embarking on now. And so, as a result, we are going to be seeking a new independent chair to lead the company moving forward. And we'll be looking at additional NED roles as well. We've engaged a leading headhunting firm, and we will be embarking on that process in line with the principles laid out, in terms of best practice and the sorts of process expectation that the government and other key stakeholders will have. So we are embarking on that process. That search has begun, and it is our intent that there'll be sort of new board composition coming into focus in the next sort of 3 to 6 months, as those searches ultimately come to fruition and we start to reshape the board composition. So that's where we are in terms of the building blocks that I talked about. I've probably gone a few minutes longer than I was expecting. The one piece that's missing from this that we are working on and we will be willing to share with members as soon as we've got it in a position that's sort of fit to share, is a little bit of a timeline to help everybody think through when they can expect these things to drop, when members can expect to see some of these things start to play out. And we'll share that timeline as soon as we've got a couple of the last pieces of that buttoned up and resolved. And so we'll aim to share that as well. So hopefully this is helpful, and it gives a little bit of context about where we are and a little bit of an understanding for members in terms of the steps that we're taking and the process that we're embarking on with the listening process. And with that, I suggest we pause and move to some of the Q&A.
Okay, I'll pick up there, Rob. I'm just going to crack on with some of the pre-submitted questions.
Sure.
I will say some of the questions were submitted by more than one person, but we start with a question from Dan Rogers. Why were the board appointments not disclosed for 9 days?
So I think that refers to the appointment that we made of a couple of the executives to the board. We felt that making those appointments was important to have the connectivity back into the business because obviously, as members are aware, the other 3 executives were removed from the board. It's not a question of that we were hiding anything or that there was some desire to not disclose these things. We informed members before we made the filing at Companies House. That filing is required to be made inside of 14 days. The appointment of those individuals was clearly part of the contingency planning measures that we had laid out, ready to go in the event of the motion passing for the EGM. If you go back to the articles of the company and the board composition for the company, it's really predicated on 3 things. It says that there will be up to 4 elected members who are directors. There are up to 4 appointed directors, and there are up to 4 members of the executive team who are directors of the board. It's important to understand that the governance of the company implies all 3 of those things, okay? We made a decision to appoint 2 people as an interim measure. It's short term. Once this new CEO is appointed, we will be revisiting that, right? And so just to be clear about that, that is a short term interim measure. And it's important that we stay connected to the governance structure that's laid out in the articles of the company, and that we have some people who can help play the information that they hear back from the board into the organization and represent the employees as stakeholders. So there was no delay on our part, and we informed members prior to the filing that we made at Companies House.
Okay, I'll crack on a bit. Next question from Andrew. Hi, Andrew. How about a review of executive pay?
Yep, so again, it's clear from the feedback that we got from members that executive pay was an issue. As everyone's aware, prior to the EGM, we did make a commitment to freeze board pay. However, I do acknowledge that there's more work needed here. We are reviewing the benchmarks. There's more to come on this. We are committed to looking at this, and I do recognise it's a concern for members. It's been an issue. We will be looking through the remuneration committee. We will be looking at the comp for executives to ensure that we understand and acknowledge member concerns, but equally try and make sure that we've got the right package to attract good people and reward the right behaviour, right? So it's definitely an issue. I acknowledge that, recognise that. We are committed to a review here. We've started the work underway with the benchmarking, and once that's completed, we'll obviously look at that in the context of the executive pay.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Next question is about the Nominet's plan moving forward. So question asked by Prudence Malinke. Hi, Prudence. What is the status of the proposed Nominet plan? And there's a slight build on that from other members. Why haven't you reviewed the 7-point plan in light of the EGM results? So a bit more about plans moving forward, please.
Okay, yeah, that's all right.
Can I just put it?
Yeah, let's put it down. Great. All right, have a good day. Have a good day as well today.
How many time we live? Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Rex.
Sorry, there's a bit of background noise there. Sorry. So I think the question was around the plans. So look, as I put in my note that went out to members a few days ago, it's clear that the 7-point plan didn't go far enough. So, you know, in terms of what's the status of the proposed Nominet plan, hopefully I've laid out some of the points here and in my sort of earlier remarks, and I'm sure, Ellie, you can jump in and talk a little bit about the state of play with the listening process and the RAC group in just a minute. But if I look at some of the things that we're talking about, I've tried to touch on some of them. I will say that we did acknowledge that the 7-point plan didn't go far enough. You know, we clearly are trying to do some things differently, and we recognize that need for change. So we will continue with the steps that we feel are the right thing to do and that clearly do still resonate with members. So, for example, you know, the commitment to continue to look at public benefit, executive comp, all those sorts of things. However, we acknowledge that the plan didn't go far enough. This, for me, is a great example of where the listening exercise is going to help us bring out the right issues and the right prioritization to help us take that step forward. Okay, and so, you know, it's a little bit of a, when I stand here today and I'm talking about what we're trying to do, it's a little bit of a balancing act, right? Because I could stay here and say, you know, here's the 15 things that we're doing, right? But then if I'm doing that, I'm not actually giving the listening process its due, right? We've got to run the listening process, get the feedback from members, understand very specifically things like the priorities, things like the order, things like the nuances that exist on some of the issues, the wide spectrum of feedback that we have from people at one end of the spectrum to people at the other end of the spectrum, right? So I could sit here today and lay out another 7-point plan or an 8-point plan or whatever it might be, right? But then I'm not actually going to be listening to the listening process. So for me, what we're trying to do is say, look, here's a set of things that we're doing. We committed to doing those things. We are still doing them. We committed to the executive comp review, for example. We're still doing that. Okay, so we're still going to do those things. However, we need to give the listening process the oxygen to gather its feedback, identify the issues, give members the opportunity to prioritize, and then move forward with it. So what we're doing now is to try to go deeper and wider than the 7-point plan. We're looking at these issues. We understand and acknowledge the need for change, but we've got to give that process the oxygen it needs to help members identify what it is that they want. And then we can look at it, interpret it, and publish those findings, and then start to chart the path forward based on that. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully the slides that we laid out earlier today help a little bit as well. You know, we are committed to the change. We are doing some things that are clearly going to be consistent with the future direction of the business, but we want to make sure that listening process gets the oxygen it needs. Ellie, do you just want to come in a little bit and talk about the latest on the RAC, for example?
Yeah, sure. And just quickly on the listening process, we will that kicks off next week. It's going to be an independent process. We understand that that's really important, that people feel it's an independent process, but is also inclusive of all members and stakeholders, and that critically nothing is off the table in terms of how that will work. So the first step next week will be to come out to members to really understand your priority issues that you really want tackled. You know, it won't mean that other things aren't, that anything's on the table during the process itself, but we really want to understand where those priorities are. That will be followed by a series of focus groups. We'll have a full online consultation, and then there'll be some deeper dive interviews as part of the process as well. We really want to air everything so that what comes out of that and what we can ultimately publish is something that we can and the board can move forward with. So you'll hear more about that next week. On the RAC design group, the Registry Advisory Council design group, that work is ongoing. We felt it was very important that was a member-led process, that members are leading the design of the group itself. And so whilst we had some draft terms of reference that went out, again, that is all up for grabs in terms of how the RAC is ultimately constituted, and key questions around things like scope, and how that group will work and the topics that will be covered are all currently under consideration, and ultimately will form a series of recommendations that will then form the basis for the Registry Advisory Council itself. So that's an active piece of work. Nominet staff are supporting it, but just from a sort of administrative perspective, but that's a member-led process. And we're really looking forward to seeing what comes out of that.
Ellie, can you just say a little bit more about one of the questions that came in advance is what kind of questions are you going to ask on the deep learning exercise? So what things are you going to cover? Can you maybe share a flavour of that?
Yeah, so I mean, we haven't designed all of it yet with the independent research partner, but the point of the exercise next week is to really make sure we've got the right topics under consideration. So we'll actually be asking for members' input on the topics that you really want to be part of the exercise. And so, yeah, it will cover everything from, I suspect, everything from governance to price to how we operate commercially, to diversification, to a whole range of things, and the things that we heard through the EGM, the topics that were really an issue for many members, and anything new that members want to put on the table. So it really will be a really broad exercise, and ultimately what we're trying to do, as well as making sure we understand all perspectives of members and stakeholders, is come out with some something that's cohesive at the end, that is then the basis of which we can move forward and recommend further change.
Okay, thanks. Next question is about diversification. So Paul Cienciala, hope I pronounced that correctly, apologies if not, Paul. I would like to know aggregated financial details regarding diversification projects over the last few years, i.e. Oxbotica, Driven Consortium, Whitespace, Spectrum, etc. So request for more details on that. Probably one for you, Rob, I think.
Yeah, so yes, and we will provide and expect to provide more continued details. As I said in my earlier remarks, I've shared the revenues associated with some of these pieces. The cost piece needs a little bit more work, and so we will work on those things with a view to providing that disclosure to members moving forward. When you've got to look at those things, you have to think about how you're allocating costs and overheads and all those different things. I think that, so yes, more to come. And hopefully today is a signal that we are trying to be a little bit more transparent about some of the things that we had. On some of the projects that are identified there, I can sort of confirm to members that relatively small teams, in the context of a business of our size, to give you some examples, on the autonomous vehicle project in fiscal year 20, it would have been about 400K as an example. The teams are relatively small, so you're probably talking single-digit number of headcount for any of those projects at any point in time. So, I think in the context of a business of our size and scale, and we've acknowledged, as I said earlier in my prepared remarks, right? Not all of these things have worked out as the company would have wanted or as planned, right? So that's clear, and we've taken decisions to move on from those and shut those down. All of that work came to a halt in 2020. For the Spectrum stuff, that was spun out and developed by Red Technologies and is now part of their platform. So all of that work's now come to a halt. It hasn't worked out in the way that the company would have wanted, although I can sort of say to members that the number of heads involved and the relative costs involved were relatively small in the context of an organization of our size and scale. So I quote a couple of examples there. As we move forward, we will be figuring out ways to be more transparent around costs and the underlying pieces of the P&L, as I talked about in my prepared remarks.
Okay, I think I'm going to make this the last question to leave time for questions in the room. This is about the appointment of the interim CEO, so probably one for one of the independent directors. Why was Ellie appointed as interim CEO after being removed from the board? And that's a question from Andrew McGregor.
Yeah, so I mean, I can see one or two of my direct colleagues are on the call, and they should feel free to jump in if they wish. But let me take the first crack. Look, I think the Ellie is and she's on the call obviously, so I'm trying not to embarrass her. Ellie is a very strong registry executive. She knows this business well. She knows it deeply. And I think, you know, if you wanted somebody who can understand how this business works, then, you know, Ellie is clearly the strongest person and strongest candidate for that. You know, the motion obviously sought to remove Ellie from the board. That has now happened. However, if we're looking at the short-term stability of the organization, then I can't think of anybody more appropriate to lead the organization than Ellie through that short-term period. We've made it clear that the appointment is interim. We've made it clear that we are embarking on a new search for a new CEO. That is absolutely the case. That will continue. But in the meantime, to ensure the stability of the organization and the continued smooth running of the registry business, I'm delighted that Ellie has sort of agreed to step up and help us do that. And you know, I can assure members that she's working, you know, round the clock to make that happen and to start delivering on some of this program of change that we're committed to.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm going to hand over to Nick, who I think has been reading the chat and the chat amongst the room, and obviously members might want to come in and ask a live question. Either if I haven't asked your question correctly or specifically, or if you want to respond to anything that's come up today.
Great. So there are lots of questions in the chat. Anybody who is on the Nominet board and wants to take some of them is welcome to. If you've got questions which you'd like to ask verbally, please raise your hand and we will unmute you so you can ask those. There's a lot of questions around sort of transparency points, I guess, and like I know historically we used to publish like a summary of what happened in the board meetings shortly afterwards, and there's a question around when are Nominet going to publish detailed minutes of each board meeting and what's discussed.
So thanks for the question, whoever raised it, and I can tell you that as a presenter, it's very difficult to keep an eye on the chat questions at the same time as doing the presenting. So I apologize for, you know, if I'm not responding directly to the 97 points that are in chat, it's because I'm trying to concentrate on the rest of the call. But to come back to the point, look, I think there are several reasons why we would not publish board minutes. I think there are some things that are discussed, including some of our work around the government, that that you wouldn't want published in a sort of an open forum and you know, something like that. I think what we can certainly do is take away the feedback and work out if there are ways in which we can provide members with some sort of an update on key topics post a board meeting as part of our communications approach and strategy. I think there are sensitivities around, and I'm not aware of any company, certainly none that operate any government critical national infrastructure, that would publish board minutes. I just don't think that's appropriate for a company of you know, doing the sorts of services that we do. But we can certainly take the feedback on board and see if there's a way in which we can find a way to improve the communication with members around some of the key topics that are coming up and being surfaced.
Thank you. Another question here around Carl's question here is in the chat, which is essentially around can the chair or interim CEO make a comment as to why Nominet, what should be a digital first company, sent the register of members to Simon Blackler on over 500 printed A4 pages, also sent myself a response to subject access request on over 300 printed A4 pages, contrary to legal requirements of GDPR, Data Protection Act. So this is this has been raised before, I think, but sending printed copies.
I'm not close to the background behind the printed copies. Ellie, is there anything that you would add?
I think the the printed copies were sent out in a direct response to the request that came in. I think it's a fair challenge and one that we need to look at and make sure that we are being as efficient as possible in the way that we handle these things. And in fact, we've been looking at, in response to the issues that arose around the voting rights around the EGM, can we be just generally more transparent about the membership register and voting rights, etc., going forwards, and hopefully things like that and more transparency there would mitigate some of those issues in the future.
I think the point is noted, and we'll try to respond to that. Yeah, I can talk about the data subject stuff, and actually, in terms of the volume, I couldn't send it by email because it was too large. So that was part of the question there.
Other questions, Nick?
Talk about why can't members get in contact directly with the non-executive directors, and can their details be more available for people to contact them?
I saw that one register pop up in the chat box. I had a little smile because we've been talking about exactly that. In fact, I've been in conversation with a couple of people this morning about how we can make that happen. So we are talking about publishing a specific email address where members can send their emails in, and that will be accessible to all directors. And so whether or not they're elected or appointed NEDs, it will be available to all of them. And so everyone will get access to that and we'll be able to see it and respond accordingly. So I was having that conversation only this morning with one or two members of the Nominet executive team. So hopefully we'll be able to get that resolved and published shortly, but the idea would be that we have an email alias that members can use to get in touch with all directors.
So just in terms of the timing, there's been several people saying that 1 hour isn't enough for the number of questions to be answered properly, and that we should put in another session as soon as possible in order to continue this Q&A and dialogue. How did Nominet board directors feel about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to do that. The thing that's important to me is engagement, right? And constructive engagement. We are committed to the plan that we laid out. We're committed to doing the things that we've talked about doing. Part of that is we acknowledge the need for improved member engagement. If members are finding this useful and helpful, then I'm happy to do it, and I'm sure that Ellie would do the same. So I'm happy for us to schedule more time to go through more of these topics. I think we've
got time scheduled in May, but we can look at
yeah, there's another session scheduled next month, and we can look at having a longer session perhaps for that one if there's going to be this many people on the call and this many questions. So I'm just trying to see, we've got another 8 minutes or so. I can't see any hands up in the participants, and if there's any sort of further questions, maybe I've lost them in the extensive chat. Some of them are questions, some of them are comments, but if you can, sorry, Rob.
Yeah, I think it's Dan Rogers is trying to get his hand up. I don't know if that's true or not, and whether or not we can unmute.
Dan, have you got a question? I can unmute you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not seeing an option to raise my hand on the software, so so I wanted to address my original question, as I don't think it was properly answered. So the issue I was raising was the fact that there were plenty of opportunities to notify members of those appointed directors. And while I might not necessarily like the way it was done, I accept that had to be done according to the board. But the issue was that you did not notify members on the first communication after the announcement of the EGM vote, nor the ones in between. So it was a decision to wait 9 days before telling us, despite previous communications where that could have been mentioned. And that's what I want explained.
Well, so fair question, Dan, and thanks for raising it. No issue with you following up. The very first communication that went out was obviously, pre-staged and as a direct you know, sort of part of our contingency plan in the event that the motion went in the way that it did. So it would not have been possible to have done it in the first communication. Okay, so just, yeah, because at that point we wouldn't have had the necessary steps in place to appoint the individuals, right? So the very first one that went out on the day of the meeting was kind of already pre-wired in that sense, and the appointments then came after that. Again, I can assure you that there's not a conspiracy situation here. There, as you might imagine, as a result of the vote, there was plenty of things that we needed to do in terms of board governance structure. We had to have a board meeting in order to appoint the people. We had to notify, you know, various key stakeholders of the vote itself and the outcome of the vote and what it meant. So conversations with government and others. And literally then working on the communication, writing the communication on the things that we were doing. It just took time, and the primary focus that we had at the time was to make sure of operational stability, that we continue to provide the service that we continue to provide, and that we engage with all the people that we needed to. So you know, it was not, there was no conspiracy. You know, the first communication was already pre-wired. We then had to go through the steps. We then had to write the communication. We didn't, I can see the chat pop up. We didn't inform government of that before we informed members. Just to be clear, my comment around government was to inform them around the outcome of the vote and the things that were going on, right? So just to be 100% clear.
Thank you. So, Rob, a question in terms of the outgoing CEO and chair. What's their payoff arrangements? It's a question from, sorry, I lost it now. Leslie Banda.
So that's being handled by the remuneration committee. Those discussions are ongoing. They've not been concluded. And so, you know, at this point in time, it's a sensitive matter. It's not one that I can, and it's still ongoing. So it's not one I can discuss or share on this call. We will, of course, it will obviously be public at some point, and so we will make sure that members are aware of it once concluded.
Thank you. Question from Andy Fletcher. You keep mentioning the listening exercise, but the EGM vote was the clearest request from the members for very specific changes, which you have failed to act upon as requested. So why should members believe that listening will result in the desired change?
I think the listening exercise, if I just come on this one quickly, Rob, this isn't about determining an outcome. It is about understanding the breadth of issues across members and all members and wider stakeholders as well. And that would then flow into any need for further change, and we'll publish the outcome of that. But the exercise itself is about really understanding the breadth of issues and the priorities for different parts of the membership and for different groups of stakeholders, and trying to, from that, develop some sort of cohesive and coherent outputs that would then inform what we do next.
Thank you. So I've got a couple more questions probably before we have to wrap up, just to let everybody know. Question here from Carl. Can the interim chair please confirm that they understand their responsibilities under the Articles of Association is to the members of Nominet, and that all other parties' interests are secondary to the interests of those members? That's an interesting question.
Well, I believe that the articles are actually that we act in the public benefit, public interest. And I believe, and Nick, you're probably better qualified than I am to answer this, but I believe that was a change that was made to the articles quite some time ago. And so it is that we act in public benefit, public interest, rather than in the interests of members per se. Now, clearly, all of our members are very important stakeholders. We understand that, and that's partly why we're going through the process that we're going through. But to be clear, the articles do not say that. The articles say that we act in public benefit, public interest. And I believe that's true, right, Nick?
I think that's absolutely right. And I think this is part of a sort of a long-standing source of tension. You know, the company's directors have got broader duties than just exclusively to the members of the company. And that is clear in not just from constitutional documents of the company, but in most companies now it's understood that the directors' duties are a cover a wider range of things, from environmental to staff, and other considerations have to be taken into account in addition to the desires of members. I think the second thing to say really on members is that there's a lot of members, and there's quite a few issues where members have got quite strongly divergent views. So to do something for some members usually means doing something against other members. So sorry, it's really close for time now.
I think there's one question from because you can't see all the screens here. I think Andrew's got his hand up. Nick.
Okay, Andrew.
Hi. Following the result of the EGM, does the board have confidence in the voting rights structure, in particular the 3% cap, which seems to be working well at the moment? Have you decided to review this or seek to change the cap? And if there is a second EGM, which most people on social media seem to be going on about at the moment, would the board change the cap during that EGM?
So you know, look, I'm not going to speculate about a second EGM or not, right? I mean, the first EGM was a signal for change, and we are trying to address that, right? I appreciate that not every member 100% agrees with everything that we're doing, right? As Nick just said, there is a wide range of spectrums. We want to hear from all of you, right? I'm not presuming that I know the answer to all of these questions, right? We want your feedback. I'm not going to speculate on a second EGM. I hope we don't. I think it would be damaging for the company, right? And I hope that through the things that we are doing, that people understand that we are driving change and that we're adopting a different tone, a different approach as a company. Yeah, I hope that that is clear from this conversation, from others that's going on. But I'm not going to second guess whether or not we do that or not. Right. I'm not going to speculate. I think it would be a damaging exercise for the company. But, you know, notwithstanding that, if you come back to the point that you made around voting caps, I believe the caps were put in place some time ago. I think the industry is a little bit different now than it was then when those caps were put in place. I think over the long term, I think we need to look at it. Right. And I'm not saying that means we're doing something today or tomorrow. I'm just saying that over the long term, I think we need to look at it. I think we've got to work out what's the right structure that adequately represents the voice of all of our members. And, you know, I put it in my slides as one of the things that we want to get member feedback on is how we should think about that. How should we think about the voting rights structure? How should we think about the caps? That's absolutely one of the questions that Ellie and the team are teeing up as part of that process. We want your feedback.
Thank you. I think that's the wrap time. We've got 2 minutes over. There will be more questions. Please, if there are any more questions which you don't feel have been answered satisfactorily, send them through to engagement@nominet.uk. Thank you very much, everybody who has attended. Just in relation to the journalist, I don't think he actually joined the call in the end, just to answer that question in the chat. And we will look at having a longer session for the May call. So yeah, thanks very much, and thanks to all the directors. Thanks for all the questions. And in terms of engagement, thank you very much, and look forward to speaking further. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time. Have a good day.